I think at this point it doesn't matter what type of color story it is. As long as it isn't full of puke shades, poop shades, and mustard shades, any Beauty Bay monochromatic palette is going to spark my interest. And I remember before I got into Beauty Bay that there was this botanical palette that everybody loved, and it was strictly limited, and people were very, very sad when it got discontinued. But now they came back with it and with a revamped version. I, of course, got me the 42 pan version, but they also have here the 16 pan version. So if you think that 42 pan is a bit too overwhelming for you, you have the option to go for a 16 pan. And the good thing is about the Beauty Bay size system is that the 42 pan palette is basically the full color palette of this topic. And the 16 pan is just 16 shades picked out of this palette. And sometimes, and with the Botanical they didn't do that, there is also a 9 pan where they then pick 9 shades out of this. So it is not that when you don't have the 16 pan version that you are missing out on a certain shade. All of the shades of the collection are always in the 42 pan, and the 16 and the 9 pan palettes are just selections out of that full color story. Which one you at the end want to use and want to have and feel comfortable with, that is totally up to you. Personally, you know me, I don't have a problem with big palettes. I like big palettes a lot because of the variations that you can get out of these. And some of you might be now surprised and say, hey Ella, you hate greens. You even decluttered the earthy palette. Yes, this here was the earthy palette, and when I saw the Botanical, I was constantly thinking, this is the fucking same palette. But it isn't. The earthy palette is truly earthy. You also have these rows of like browns, and I even want to say some mauves in there, but overall the vibe of this palette is earthy. It's muddy greens, it's olive greens, it's earth tones. The Botanical palette has a little bit of that olivey spectrum over here and a little bit of the earthy spectrum over here. But other than that, most of the greens here are either very, very blue based. I even want to say they look like a certain type of dark water. I know that this sounds weird because water is not green, but sometimes depending on what's on the floor of the water. Wait. Seabed. That was way too easy. But sometimes depending on what's on the seabed or any type of plants that are floating around water, you can't dive in each water, you can't swim in every water. Waters can have this greeny tint to them without looking dirty or looking like a puddle or something. This palette here, in my opinion, catch that vibe. And I think the eye look that I'm wearing right now is really showing this. This is, by the way, the third look that I will show you. Let's talk now about the swatches. So I swatched this palette in 3 different pictures. So the first picture here is showing you the first 2 rows. You see very, very green inspired, but in those greens, so many options, so many different hues. The next 2 rows are kind of transitioning from having a lot of green into having more like browny neutral shades. You also, you also have this little pop of orange in there, but also a bright green going on, some goldies, some oranges. It is a very, very transitional row, or very transitional 2 rows of shadows. And this last picture here, wow, this doesn't even look like it comes from the Botanical palette because there is not a single green in there. We have some wine colors, some purples. We have also grays and beautiful translucent shimmers. And then we have that one shade here that is shifting goldy blue that is called Waterfall. I will in a second compare it with shades like Cleona Regal and Pisces from Adept Cosmetics. And there are some others from Blend Bunny that are similar, but we will do the comparison in a second. Overall, I think when you just see these pictures of these swatches, you can definitely see the variation, the option, the whole palette of joy that is in this palette. And I also try to catch the vibes of the shimmers here now in the common videos. They're all done with phone and flash, so you can see the shimmers and the metallics. Aside from that waterfall color, none of these shades I would call duochromes or multichromes. Beauty Bay in their regular palettes is really focusing more on classic metallics, classic glittery shades, and I personally think that they did a great job with that. I also got a very special swatch request in my post that I did a couple weeks ago where I announced the palette and gave you a shopping link. By the way, if you want to get this or a 16 pan, both shopping links to Beauty Bay are in the info box below. I don't have a discount with Beauty Bay, but I can get commission through that. Keep an eye out. Beauty Bay's products, like their own product line, is constantly in kind of a sale of buy two and get 20% off. So definitely keep an eye out on that on the website. And if you use my link, thank you very much. But in that post that I did, I got a swatch request to compare some of these shades here with the Lisa Aldrich Sorcery. And of course, I will swatch that for you. I screenshotted it, I saved it, and I did not forget it. So the first request was to compare Grotto with the shades Vine and Valley. So let's do that. So we have Grotto, this is the metallic here. By the way, the Sorcery from Lisa Aldrich is just still to this day one of the most beautiful eyeshadow palettes ever to exist. And here we have it swatched out. Grotto has a dirty olivey base, I would say, with some golden shimmers in there and some very beautiful, also blue leaning specks mixed in there. It's a very interesting shade. And the two shades that I should compare with this are Vine and Valley. So let's do this. So I swatched Vine over here and Valley next to it. I absolutely see what you meant and I absolutely understand. To be honest, I think that Valley is much closer to Grotto than Vine is. Vine has this more dirty blue vibe going on, while Valley picks up more on the golden sheen that Grotto has. And the other request was the shade Madrigal, whatever, the upper gold here. Let's swatch that. Such a pretty gold. Oh, I love that. It also has a greeny base like our favorite Labyrinth from Haggard, but it's not even close to that. And I was asked to compare it with the shade Artichoke from the Beauty Bay palette, and absolutely not. Honestly, you know what? Let's experiment a bit, because I feel like Artichoke could be much closer to Grotto at the end. No. Artichoke is much greener than Grotto is. Or not greener, more golden. I'm sorry, green golden. But here you have the comparison. I hope that this helps you. And then I want to show you some extra side-by-side comparisons of the shade Waterfall. Come on, I think this type of blue shift that we have in here, it is blue, it's golden, it's just something super duper special. Everybody loves the shade. I haven't met any person who says, oh my god, I do not like this shade. And I think there is a reason for that. But when I saw this, I immediately thought of Cleona Regal, I immediately thought of Pisces from Adept Cosmetics, and I immediately thought of that one shimmer from the Blend Bunny Longing palette. So let me pick these up from my collection and then show you some comparisons. So let's start with the Cleona version of this. This is Regal. Oh, it is such a beautiful shade. I think the amount of golden flecks in there is a little bit lower compared to Waterfall. So yeah, very, very, very similar. But Waterfall is more lilac-y than Regal is because Regal has more of a true blue base. Or a true light blue, not the true blue, like the primary color blue. Let's try Adept Cosmetics Pisces, and I kind of feel like that this is going to be the closest to Waterfall. Oh my god, they are the same color. And to make it complete, the shade that I was referring from the Blend Bunny is the shade When It Rains. But I think that they are not even close. But Pisces and Waterfall from Beauty Bay and Adept Cosmetics are the same shades. And here you have them again in a close-up. We have Waterfall from Beauty Bay, Regal from Cleona, Pisces from Adept Cosmetics, and the last one is When It Rains from the Blend Bunny Longing palette. And after all the swatches and comparisons, let's finally head into the 4 looks of this video and then my final thoughts on this palette. We're starting with the shade Fossil, and I apply this roughly in the crease and transition area. I then go into Ash and use this to deepen up the crease. I now go into Marsh, use this here on the outer crease and basically the whole outer third of the lid. And then I slightly blend it up and a little bit inwards. I now go into Fog and I apply this on the outer half of my lid. And then I go into Pistachio and apply this here on the rest. And to create the gradient, I let Pistachio feather out into the Fog shade. For liner, I will be using Urban Decay's Whiskey and line the waterline. And then I pick up Marsh again and use this to smudge it out here on the lower lash line quite far down. And then I go into Fossil again and slightly soften this here on that lower end. I then go into Savannah and use this as inner corner highlight. And here we have the first finished look. On the lips, I'm just wearing the Lip Fetish Balm from Pat McGrath in the shade Noir. I didn't feel adventurous today, but I do like the look. This is a type of green mixed with some sort of gray and cool tone browns that I really, really like. And I think it was a great idea to also include this pistachio shade here on the inner part. I'm really digging this green. So that is a good start. Moving on to the next look. So I'm starting this look with the shade Lily down here, and I apply this into crease and transition area. But honestly, this is really just a brightening base shade, nothing more, nothing less. I then go into Sea Moss and start to apply this on the inner crease part, and then I'm bringing it to the center. This shade definitely takes some layers to get to this vibrant level. This is my second one, and I think that is it. I now go into Clay and use this on the outer crease part, connect them both in the center, and then I'll also make Clay connect here in the V motion with my lashes. I also went back into the first shade Lily and I used this on the outer edges to smooth it out. I now go into the shade Canyon and I apply this starting in the center of the lid, and then I'm bringing it outwards. I now go into Kelp and I use this on the rest of the lid, and you know it where they both meet. I mix them together by tapping in the line of both. For liner, I will be using the Natasha Denona Macro Tag liner in the shade Taupe. And line the waterline with that. And then I go into the shade Oak and smudge this here across the lower lash line. And then I also tap into clay and smudge that slightly below. So it does cover most of it, but it's also covering the skin for an even further down blend. And while I overall like how this looks, I feel there is something missing. So this is one of the rare occasions where I'm adding a liner, but I'm not adding a black liner for this look. I will be going in with a brown liner. This is Pat McGrath Perma Precision Liquid Eyeliner in Extreme Black Coffee. It is a super dark brown, and I will do a tiny wing with it. Tiny wing, she said, and is covering half of the lid with eyeliner, but nonetheless, I think this tied the look together very well. And here we have the finished look, and I completely forgot to film the inner corner highlight. I went in with Savannah like in the first look because I felt like nothing else would have matched. And on the lips, I'm wearing the new Fenty lip oil in the shade Rose Amber. I kind of want to make this video now a challenge. How many looks can I create with this palette without the green being center of attention? Because now with the second look, I didn't even use any green at all. And with the first look, I only used, which was a pistachio, as a very obvious green. I kind of like in what direction this is going because I am able to just mix, match, and choose the types of color from this green tone palette without it being overwhelmingly just green looks, which is one of the reasons why I tend to buy these 42 pens from Beauty Bay. But for the next two looks, while I like this overall, I will definitely try to focus more now on the greens, so forgive me that. But now, look 3 and 4 will incorporate a lot of green. Look number 3, I start with the shade Dune, and I apply this in my transition color, as transition color in my transition area. I then go into the shade Myrtle and start to blend this on the inner crease part and bring it towards the center, but the brush is really poorly chosen. So I took another one that is much better. The first one was a little bit too flimsy. I now go into Spruce and use this on the outer crease part. I actually mainly tap it on instead of blending it on, because I now take a clean brush first and start to diffuse the outer edges. And then I take that brush and actually tap into the peppermint shade here and very, very softly start to blend that on the outer parts. I also go back into Dune and I just apply this on the most outer edges. I now pick up the shade Surf and I use this on the outer half of my lid. And then I go into Waterfall. I'm very excited for this shade. And I use this on the rest of the lid and combine both. For the lower lash line, I will be taking a liner from Colourpop. This is the shade Crystal Crush. It is a very bright blue, but I think it might work very, very well with the more blue toned greens here in this eye look. I now tap into Ivy and I run this very, very close along my lower lash line all the way to the inner corner. Now I pick up, what is it called? Samphire, and I blend that out with that. Honestly, I think that is the purest green color that I own in my collection. And while I like the contrast of the different undertones here, I still want to bring back some of the blueness from the upper look. So I take the shade Myrtle again, and with a very, very light hand, I use this to smudge it out. For the inner corner highlight, I go into Quartz and apply this. Here we have now the finished third look, and on the lips, I decided to go with something very, very simple. This is the Isamaya Lip Black in the shade Ultraviolet. Honestly, I think this is one of those looks where if you would tell me that you are able to create this water-inspired blue-green look with the Beauty Bay Botanical palette, I would have told you, yeah, in your dreams. But no, and that is actually what makes this palette so exciting for me personally. It's the undertones of green. So let's now head into the fourth look of this video and then my final thoughts. We are not commenting this here. I just refreshed my black and I always end up with color on the skin. It will wash off in a couple of days. But we're talking about this here. So for the last look of this video, I'm very, very torn because there is still so many shades in here that I haven't used. I didn't even tackle here the purple area, but you know what? Let's do something that is quite out of my comfort zone, I would say. So let's start with Tundra. And I apply this as my transition shade. I now go into Herb and I run that through the complete crease. And I also slightly buff it upwards. I now go into Moth and bring in here some darkness on the outer V, or basically the outer lid and outer crease part. With a small brush, I go now into Hemp and blend this here in the inner crease part. I have to admit that this shade Herb went on very, very patchy, but I'm 95% positive that it is because of the brush. This is a very, very old Morphe brush, and I don't know why I'm still keeping this, because this every time just does not work, so pretty sure it was that brush. That's why I went now into the other shade for the inner crease to just buff it out a bit better. Glitter glue is down, and now I go into the shade Vine, and I use this on the outer third up to the outer half of my lid. And then I go into Amazon and I apply this on the rest of my lid. And then I just mix them together where they both meet. I tap back into Herb, but with a better blending brush, and I run that through the crease again to bring back that shade here and to also correct the patchiness. So let's play a little bit with contrast here in this look. So I start with the Victoria Beckham Satin Kajal in the shade Bordeaux, and I line my waterline with that. I instantly get Christmas vibes. I don't know, but green and reddish colors, Christmas to me. But I now go into the shade Bramble. Is it Bramble? Yeah, Bramble's the name. And blend this out on the lower lash line here. And then I tap into Mushroom and just give it a bit of a diffused blend underneath. For inner corner highlight, I actually go into Lightning and apply this. And there you have it now, the last finished look on the lips. I'm wearing the Florasis Flawless Jade Hydrating Lipsticks in the shade L03 Maple Tart. Of course, in 4 looks, I was not able to use all 42 shades, but let's just quantify everything before we go into a little bit more of a feeling thing here. My personal excitement for this palette, honestly, it is at a 7 because it is at the end a green eyeshadow palette. What makes this a 7 and not a 0 in personal excitement? Because honestly, swampy palettes are really easy a 0. These types of greens in here with their bluish undertones, they spark excitement for me. So I think a 7 out of 10 is a good rating. Quality-wise, this is a solid 8 out of 10. I love the Beauty Bay formula. You know that there are formulations out there that are better, but there are formulations out there that are way worse, especially when you look at the price range, because this 42 pan eyeshadow palette is around 30 bucks. So this is, in my opinion, a really good price for what you get at the end. So we can even say that this is drugstore priced, in my opinion. Although I have seen eyeshadow palettes from NYX Cosmetics that were 40 bucks. So this is definitely affordable. When it comes to the color story, I think this color story just works. The thing is there something that I am missing in this palette? Not so much. I do though think that some of the shades are maybe a little bit misplaced. For example, the shade Waterfall, as beautiful as it is, I don't think that it should be in this palette. I think it can be incorporated, but this is a shade that I much rather see in a more cool tone palette. For example, Beauty Bay's Metamorphic. I'm pretty sure Metamorphic has a similar shade, but we haven't swatched it. Let's just compare it for a second. Yeah, actually, the shade Figtail here is very, very similar to Waterfall. I take that back. Here we have Figtail and here we have Waterfall. The base is completely different. And if you remember the swatches from the beginning, I would say that Figtail is even much closer to Regal from Cleona. I have nothing really to criticize with Beauty Bay eyeshadows in general. They come in beautiful color stories. Everything is there for everybody. So if this is not your jive, there is probably an eyeshadow color story from the Beauty Bay brand in this format that will be there for you. And keep in mind, you don't have to pick up 42 pans. They have 16 and a lot of the times 9 pan palettes too. I prefer this though much over the earthy palette, and I see myself actually using it, but not in the summer really. If we again talk about seasonal makeup, why did I say again? I haven't talked about seasonal makeup yet. If we talk about seasonal makeup, I would put this more into a fall vibe, not so much into the summer. Maybe the more orangey shades, yes, but I don't know what it is, but green and even the bluish greens, they're not so much summer vibey for me personally. Do I regret buying this? Absolutely not. Is this going to be my top 10 palette? Also not, but it's a solid and it's a good palette that will not disappoint if you have this. So as always, let me know your thoughts down below. If you want to pick this up or anything else, I will put different links down below to the Beauty Bay website itself, and I will also put down specific links for the 42 and the 16 pan version of this Botanical palette. Thank you so much for joining in. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out any of the other upcoming videos, and I see you soon.